Yes, guys, what's happening? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to tonight's live stream. And as you can see, I'm joined by a special guest tonight. Delighted to be joined by Chelsea fan and political correspondent Oli Carpenter. Oli, welcome to the channel. Thank you so much for your time. And, you know, with the international break on, there's not an awful lot to talk about. But today, the headline and gods are kind of on us with the fact that we got the news broken earlier this afternoon that at the start of this month, 3rd and 4th of March, that Roman Abramovich was poisoned, essentially, I'm not sure who. Obviously, must be something to do with, obviously, Vladimir Putin. We've seen, you know, in Salisbury, where actually, ironically, I live, where the poisonings happened. And we've seen other poisonings with sort of taking place quite often. So it's not a new way of the Russians doing things, but to hear it happen to Roman Abramovich, who was brokering peace talks in Kiev, and you know, it just kind of brings the whole thing into perspective. It is mad, and I think, you know, obviously he was sanctioned about a month or so ago, and a lot of journalists, a lot of media, very quick to jump on, condemn him. You know, why is he not speaking out? Why is he not condemning Putin? Well, kind of. Here's your answer. And I think this is the clearest indication to me that actually these clear links that the UK government set up between Roman and Vladimir Putin don't seem that clear to me. I mean, Oli, what was your initial reaction to the news when it came out? The headlines had come from the Wall Street Journal, I believe, breaking it. Were you surprised to hear that? It comes as a bit of a shock to me.
A total shock. Yeah, I mean, total shock to a certain extent, right? You know, the Russians are prone to poisoning people. We've seen that from Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia in 2018 in Salisbury. I believe there was I can't remember the man's name, but he was poisoned with polonium in his tea in London.
Yeah.
I think it was in around 2006, something like that. So this isn't a new tactic from the Russian regime by any stretch. It does come as a shock, especially that it's happened to somebody who is so in the spotlight at the moment with Abramovich, especially considering his apparent roles in the peace negotiations. It does seem like, to a certain degree, you can't necessarily comment, I don't think, on what information the British government has. Obviously, it's important to know that the British government will have more information than the likes of the American government because he was doing all of his business in the UK. But specifically, the US and the Ukrainian governments have both said not to sanction him this week. And it may be looking slightly a bit more like a political wrangling rather than aiming to kick corruption out of the country. And it's a difficult thing. I mean, it's a really difficult thing, and nobody is going to necessarily know all the details yet, and we might not for some time, but it definitely seems like this is something partaken on by Russia, as we said, because it's something that they're prone to doing, such as Skripal in 2006, 2018, and all of that stuff. So, yeah, it's a massive shock, especially in the midst of the Chelsea sale as well.
Yeah, no, it really is. I mean, things coming out. I'm just going to bring something up on the screen now. You know, obviously, it was kind of people are saying it's being reported as a small dose as such. You know, not enough to cause harm or threat to life, but at the same time, you very much get the feeling that is a warning, and that if he were to carry on being involved in the peace talks, etc., could this get much worse, or do you think that this is actually perhaps potentially could not be through Vladimir Putin? It could be from what's being reported as hardline Moscow not wanting peace talks to go ahead. I mean, obviously Bellingcat, which is a investigative site, basically confirming what we said. 3 members of the delegation attending peace talks 3rd or 4th March, experienced symptoms consistent with poisoning with chemical weapons. And obviously one was Roman Abramovich. Along 3 members of the negotiating team retreated to an apartment in Kiev later, and they felt initial symptoms. So obviously eye and skin inflammation, piercing, pain in the eyes. Later that night, they went, oh, this is all quite long. Let's have a look. Based on remote and on-site examinations, the experts concluded that the symptoms are most likely the result of international poisoning with an undefined chemical weapon. And an alternative, less likely hypothesis was use of microwave irradiation. The symptoms gradually subsided in the course of the following week. It's all rather unsavory. Abramovich, for a spokesperson today, said that he very much continues to carry on negotiating and taking part in these peace deals, including, negotiating humanitarian corridors, etc. He quite literally is putting his life at risk here, isn't he?
Well, as you said earlier, it certainly seems that way. A lot of people have been coming out and saying, why hasn't Abramovich done this or said this? Or he's done a lot, but he's not said a lot. That's partly because he's a private individual, but also because it's very clear what happens to the to opposition of the Russian regime through evidence that we have seen, factual information. I'm not really one to comment on things, like who done it, he said, she said, sort of thing. When it comes to politics, I prefer facts. We've seen Alexei Navalny and the horrendous things that happened to him on a humanitarian scale. You've got Boris Berezovsky, who was critical of the Russian regime before he was eventually found dead as well, and countless others. And it definitely seems like an interesting thing. The thing that I'm not quite sure about is why it was a microscopic dose. And the reason I'm confused slightly about that is because the Russians don't give warnings usually, because it sort of shows their hand, as it were. You wouldn't want to reveal what you're going to do, or what you might do to someone before you actually do it, because actually doing it is a bigger message than threatening to do it. Maybe it's just that they didn't want that kind of attention, or they didn't want that kind of blood on their hands. Maybe that's fair. I'm not sure, but that's still definitely a mystery. The other option is it could have just been botched. It's hard to know.
Yeah, no, it's certainly interesting, and it's a big story. It really is. Do you think that there's potentially any? I know this is obviously quite a hard question to answer potentially, but with the fact that he's not been sanctioned by the American government, etc. Zelensky instructed them not to sanction him because he's playing an important role in trying to broker peace, etc. Can you envisage a situation? It would be quite ridiculous, really. But is there any chance that Roman could still keep hold of Chelsea? Do you think?
It's more likely today than it was yesterday. Let's put it that way. With the news that's come out, I think ultimately it's more likely that he will sell. Still, because it was all set in place. I think Roman was likely to have made his mind up a little while before the sanctions actually came in. Obviously, we learned just before the Luton game either of the Carabao Cup or the FA Cup. I can't remember which, but we learned then that he was planning on selling the club, and that was before sanctions at all. So I imagine he had already had his mind made up and about that he wanted to go. The only thing that there possibly could be is this sort of long game narrative people are peddling, and it's not entirely ridiculous. The concept that he's said he's selling the club, going to go through all the motions until the heat dies down, and then actually sort of U-turn on it and say no. But I'm more likely to think that he wouldn't have chartered the Rain Group to do it. He wouldn't have had so many serious bidders. I think it's just not as likely, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that is still a long way off. But with Chelsea, following them for a number of years now, you can never rule out any situation. And it certainly would be something massive. But that's just a little bit on obviously that breaking news story from earlier that Roman Abramovich was poisoned at the start of the month. Obviously, he's made a full recovery now and is fully intending to continue those peace talks. Scary times, and it's just it sort of feels like something out of a movie. It doesn't really seem real, everything that's going on at the moment with obviously the world and then this Chelsea thing as well. Just coming on to the takeover itself, what have you made of it? Because we were chatting before we come on air, and I've said I've been on other streams and said it as well, that it just feels like a massive circus. There doesn't really seem to be any structure to the process. The time frame doesn't really seem to be a fitting time frame. I know they've come out today saying, deadline of April 11th to improve bids, and then they're going to potentially take the preferred bid to the government on April 18th to try and get that through, with a view to having a sale completed by the end of this month. Sorry, not end of this month. Sorry, end of April. But quite frankly, it's been a mess, hasn't it, Ollie? People PR all over the place. Everyone's just trying to join any consortium they possibly can to be part of a group that's bidding for the club. I mean, it's been a mess, and I don't think Rain have covered themselves in glory at all. There's been no proper communication. Finding out the shortlist on Friday through journalists tweeting out so-and-so's has made the shortlist. I mean, what have you made of the way that the sale's been handled? Because this is going to be the biggest sale of a sports club that there's ever been. And it's been handled like a reality TV show.
Yeah, it does seem a lot like that, doesn't it? I think, I completely agree. It's been a bit of a media circus. I'd be one to personally give Rain a little bit more credit. I think where they've got things wrong is by not having an official communique to the media, and not having an official place where they can put messages out and say, this is what we've done, this is the decisions we've made, and being able to clarify stuff, especially on social media, because obviously journalists don't always have complete information. And we've had several good and several not so good journalists who have different sources, and that all comes from different people all trying to peddle their own narratives and things like that. So you don't get anything really official. You sort of have to piece everything together yourself, like a detective. So I think that's kind of the main issue for Rain. But you did say it yourself. It's going to be the largest sale of a sports club ever, I think, and certainly a football club at least. And with that comes a lot of issues. There's a few issues. Is one, obviously, like you said, everyone wants a slice of the pie. So there's going to be a lot of changing ideas, and there's going to be a lot of people switching sides very quickly. As we've seen with, I think it was Nick Candy's bid got rejected, and the Korean company he was with, his consortium tried to join someone else, and we're still not entirely clear on that. Excuse me. And from there, you've also got, it's such a big sale, and they're trying to do it really, really fast. You've got to remember, even though that was quite an innately political thing, and there was problems with piracy and things like that of the Premier League, the Newcastle takeover from the PIF took 9 months, I think it was, to go through. That's an extraordinarily long time. But for such a large sports club, with the amount of money involved and the amount of livelihoods at stake, the amount of people that this can affect in terms of Chelsea's sale, and the fact that Abramovich is sanctioned, so the club's sort of in like limbo, they're trying to get a lot of things done really quickly. So to a certain degree, you've kind of got to give Rain credit for taking on the task. Obviously, they're getting paid well, I'm sure, but ultimately, I think the communication is where things have broken down the most. It would be really nice to have a consistent message coming from them, because otherwise you're just ending up with incomplete information. And when you have incomplete information, you form incomplete opinions.
Yeah, no, 100%. Guys, big up everyone in the chat as well. I can see your comments coming in. Keep those coming in. Really appreciate it. Please do smash like on this video, and please do also subscribe to the channel. If you're tuning in now and you're not subscribed, please click that button. Really appreciate all the support. Ollie, moving on to the shortlisted candidates themselves. I don't want to spend too long on the Rickets, but we're going to start with them. What have you made of the fact that despite all the fan backlash and the hashtag no to Rickets on social media, etc., and fan groups meeting the Rickets as well, what have you made of the fact that they've still made the shortlist, and then they're coming out with a statement saying the door is still open when the door is anything but open? What have you made of that whole situation?
The Chelsea fans, of which I'm one, have certainly made themselves very clear. And I would like to go on the record. I think I've said this on another podcast, but I have one word when it comes to the Rickets, and that word is no. As the hashtag says, it's a difficult thing, because I think there probably is a lot of different factors that go into whether someone is going to be shortlisted or not. You've got things like you saw the I think it was the Saudi media group's bid didn't get through, which everyone expected it would. I personally didn't think it would, but everyone did think it would, because on the fact it was debt financed largely. Now, this goes back to people having incomplete information. We're well aware that the Rickets are not good owners of their current sportsing franchise in the Cubs. We know they're not liked by Cubs fans. We know they're not particularly considered fondly by Chelsea fans either at this point, of which I couldn't agree more. I think they're terrible owners and they don't stand for good things. But there's more that we won't know. We don't know the strength of their financials on the inside. Only Rain will know that. They might be ludicrously wealthy. We don't know. They might have a lot of money to be able to pump into the club. We don't know, because we don't know the intricacies. So we don't know how valuable their takeover would be, if you know what I mean. And so I think at the very least at least by Rain, if not by the fans, because it's clear the fans have made their choice, at least by Rain, they deserve to be heard. But ultimately, it's also a question about who's making decisions here. If it's Rain, it's clearly from a business perspective. If it's the board, it's quite tone deaf. Chelsea board, I mean, it's quite tone deaf in terms of like not understanding where the fans are coming from. And someone's just written in the chat, having the money and using it are two very different things. And that's 100% true. It's, if you're looking at purely from the financial side, the Rickets seem like a perfectly fine choice. They won't set the world alight, but they'd be okay. However, you've also got to think of the fact that they don't run a sports club well. And obviously the things they stand for, it's just not a good look. And I think ultimately it's not going to be a good look if they're looking to be in the final running. But the other options that we have, Rickets are certainly the worst, but there aren't many good ones.
Yeah, no, it's, do you think obviously, come out, with all the things that have been highlighted on Twitter, the way they describing COVID, the way obviously they spoke poorly about Muslims, of which there is a large contingency within the Chelsea playing squad. That's obviously not going to go down well, as you've referenced, they don't run their current sporting franchise very well in the Chicago Cubs. There's a clip doing the rounds on Twitter of Todd Ricketts getting booed when he was introducing some sort of new streaming service that they'd announced. Booed by the fans when they were doing that live. They don't have a good relationship with the fans, and it's just a massive no from a Chelsea perspective. And I think having seen the kind of the stages outlined for the next step of the process, they're very much taking into consideration fans' opinions. So everyone needs to keep this No to Rickets campaign going, because it will make a difference and we can stop this from happening. But having said that, Oli, is there a part of you that thinks that actually, there's a chance that we could end up with these guys? Or do you think it's very much off the table?
I think it depends how much the fans' option, like the fans' opinion actually plays a part. I don't know we don't know whose decision necessarily of how large a portion to place on the fans that is, so we don't know whether that's the board or whether that's Rain. I would have thought it was the board, but it's hard to know. And I think, if the fans are basically not considered at all, the Rickets may be chosen. There is that option. That is a distinct possibility, and that's why we have to keep the hashtag No to Rickets going, because otherwise, that is certainly a possibility. However, based on a lot of things that we've seen as well in the media about Chelsea not necessarily wanting a politically sensitive owner, not wanting a politically sensitive option. It's not the best option, especially considering the things that have come out now that make them seem like less than savory people. And in terms of the racism and the comments towards COVID and things like that, that doesn't sit comfortably with a lot of Chelsea fans and a lot of the squad and a lot of the staff, I'm sure. And that will be taken into account. It's just a measure of how much. So I think keeping up the campaign is the important thing.
Yeah, we've still probably got another couple of weeks going to keep that going. So it is imperative that everyone does their bit and continues to hashtag No to Rickets on social media. Just last thing on them, obviously it's been reported they've got a personal relationship with Rain. Do Do you view that is that not a massive conflict of interests, or is that just a kind of a bit of a coincidence? They might have worked together in the past, and this is a separate thing. Because I've seen people, and I think rightly, saying that there's a big conflict of interest here, isn't there?
Well, there sort of is and sort of isn't. Like, I think the important thing to remember is, like, obviously the Rickets didn't choose the rating group to do this.
Yeah.
They're clearly just a group that does this, like on a large scale quite often. So I can't imagine actually how many options there are. There'll be more than just the rating group, but the rating group might be one of the main ones. They might be the best. We don't know. But companies do businesses together all the time, and having a relationship with another company doesn't make it necessarily a conflict of interest. It just makes it a relationship with that company. The relationship might not be great. You never know. And there might be, I think, objectively, the important thing to view is that ultimately this is going to be a business decision, not whether the person in the rain group has a good relationship with the Rickets family. So I think ultimately it shouldn't make that much of an impact. And ultimately, I hope it will come down to the financial strength of the takeover and the plans that each group have gone with. But never say never.
Yeah, I mean, it would be quite something. I mean, the outrage would be quite unbelievable. But
there would be huge protests. It would be Super League all over again.
But the most important thing is, though, that it's so much easier to stop people getting in than it is to get them out. So that's why it's so important for us to keep going, because then you end up in a situation which, in my time as a Chelsea fan, we've never had, where you actively hate your owners and want them out, and it's so hard to get them out. You see it with Arsenal and the Kroenkes, you see it with United and the Glazers. They've been trying for years and years and years to get these people out, and it takes a long time. So that's why this is so important. Stop them getting in, which is far easier than once they're in, getting them out, because it can become very toxic if they're in and there's that hatred towards them, which is something as Chelsea fans we've not had to experience. Moving on to a couple of other candidates now. I'll start with the Sir Martin Broughton Consortium. This one, I don't know an awful lot about him, to be honest. I know that it's made up of global investors. Scott Lord Co., part of the consortium as well, and a couple of guys that have got stakes in Crystal Palace as well. Now, I find that I'm slightly surprised this one actually made the shortlist, based on the fact that you've got two guys with stakes in another Premier League club, and they're obviously quite happy to get rid of those and come to Chelsea. Who's to say if someone else was buying another club and they wanted these guys, they would just ditch their stake in us? How loyal are these guys? And the fact that we're looking for a quick sale, it's hard to get rid of a stake in a football club. It's not just, you just sell it, you fancy it, a few quid transaction exchange. This is big money we're talking about. Are you surprised that bid's made it onto the shortlist, given the fact it's got two people with stakes in an opposing football club in it? Because it's not a solution to a quick sale, is it?
Yeah, a little bit. But we've got to remember, I suppose, it's not just them. Like it says, it's a global consortium. It's got global backing, which I imagine it probably stands to the strength of the bid itself. But having I can't remember the other man's name, but Josh Harris and the other guy who are bidding as part of Martin Broughton, who also had a stake in Liverpool, mind you, as well. So it might just be a group of football-minded individuals getting together to actually take an opportunity that doesn't come around very often, which is to buy one of the biggest clubs in the world. But at the same time, I just can't. It would have to be really, really, really fast to get that done. And they would have to sell their shares in Crystal Palace. I imagine they would just give it to the majority owner, because I don't think either of them are the majority owner, but so they would just sell their shares to them, so they would become 100% the 100% owner. But I personally don't see it happening for that reason. It's the same with the other bid of I think is it Pagliuca with the Atalanta shares, although he's only just bought them yesterday, basically. And so I think it's clear that Rain aren't considering that very much in terms of their options about if they've got stakes in another team. It might even be beneficial to show that they know what they're doing, they know what they're talking about. and they know what kind of business they're trying to run. Rather than another, notice how every single group of people has experience in it.
Yeah.
You've got Pagliuca, who obviously only owns a club last week, but he still has it. You've got the two, you've got Broughton and the two from Crystal Palace, who obviously know how to run things at a football club because they've all done it. You've got the Rickets family, who poorly have run the Cubs and, are looking into buying other teams. And you've also got, obviously, Todd Boddy, who runs the LA Dodgers. So they all have experience in sporting franchises, and that might have actually been a defining reason why they might have been chosen.
Yeah, no, for sure. I read something, either today or the other day, saying that, they will have to dissolve those stakes if they're going to be successful, particularly Pagliuca with the 55% stake in Atalanta, because if Atalanta were to qualify for the Champions League from Serie A, then it's deemed as a conflict of interests, having obviously owning two teams in the same competition. So I don't know what he would do there. He'd have to dissolve that. He's a big stake as well. It's not like 10%, it's 55%. It's well over half.
That would also be a huge sale. It would take a lot to get over the line. That's personally why I don't think that will happen. Either that or I don't know. It seems like a really strange one. And looking at all of those options, it gives you a clear indicator of who the front runner is and should be.
Yeah, no, for sure. And Pagliuca himself was very much under the radar. Literally nothing about him at all. And then suddenly on the Friday, it just drops in that he's made the shortlist. And subsequently, I've discovered that potentially some of the reasons why he couldn't say anything was because of non-disclosure agreements. I don't know how true that is or not, but he very much appeared under the radar. Before I move on to Todd Boddy, who's very much the favourite and the popular amongst a lot of fans, there is still supposedly, according to the BBC, but the BBC seems to be the only outlet reporting it that I can find, that there's still an unnamed mystery bidder, and that the shortlist is actually 5, not 4. Have you heard anything on this? Have you got anything you can add at all? There's supposedly could still be a mystery bidder.
I had the kind of sources that the BBC did, but I'm just reading the same thing on Twitter as everyone else, I'm afraid. It's, maybe people are getting it confused. Maybe there was a mystery bidder and that was Pagliuca, and now
that's what I thought initially, but I don't know.
You would have thought when the supposed shortlist was dropped, that was when we were going to learn of any mystery bidders. So I would be remiss personally to think, especially now, with only, I know, it's the end of March, only a couple of weeks until potentially a bid is chosen, that we wouldn't either know who it is by now or at least not learn in the next couple of days.
Yeah, no, I would fully agree. I think now you get into the business end of proceedings. If you've not revealed yourself now, I think it's unlikely that there is actually another bidder, and it very much could have been Pagliuca. That was the mystery bidder at the time, potentially. But yeah, if we get more news on that as and when, then I'm sure people will find out about it. Moving on to the final guy in the short list, then obviously fronted up by Todd Boddy, the consortium consisting of himself, part owner of the LA Dodgers, very successful baseball team, run very well, always reinvests, loves winning. If you see interview clips from him there from 2019, talks about how important winning is, which is obviously music to our ears. We've been very successful as a club. We want to carry on that winning thing. We don't want to slump into mediocrity and be happy with coming fourth and making money. So that was really important. Obviously, he's got Jonathan Goldstein in his consortium as well, along with Swiss billionaire Hans-Jörg Weiss. This consortium is very much the favourite, so you can see why. Kind of a clean image for Todd Boddy, experience of running a sports club, which I think that is very important. And he's also got other people on board as well, so that the money is there as well. Oli, what do you think of this one? For me, it's probably it's my preferred choice out of what we've got left. How do you see Todd Boddy's consortium?
Todd Boehly was one of my favorite options from the beginning. It's a lot, we could only work with what we knew. And I was always a little bit suspect of the Saudi media group and their supposed interest in us, especially after it came out about, they didn't get through because their bid was based on debt financing. I know a lot of fans were thinking we were going to be trillionaires, but that certainly wasn't going to come to pass that way. Boehly is definitely my favorite. When you just look at everything he's got, where firstly he tried to buy Chelsea in 2019. He made inquiries about it. He actually set everything up. So A, he knows what he's doing. B, he's communicated with the club before. C, he has a passionate, clearly a very passionate and elite mentality for winning, which is crucial to Chelsea. 4, he's wealthy with this consortium, and it sounds like they're willing to put their hand in their pocket. 5, they're going to redevelop Stamford Bridge by the looks of it as well. They're going to sort of turn it into, people, don't like this word with football. It's a bit of a dirty word, but franchise. But I think that's kind of actually what is needed in a modern football club. Maybe that's a little bit of a hot take, but that's personally what I think. There's a lot of really good reasons. He's not got any, as far as we know, any weird political background. He's not got any strange, horrible views of his own. He seems like he's got a good head on his shoulders and he knows what he's doing, and especially in terms of running the Dodgers. And this is why I have a lot of confidence that the Rickets won't actually be the ones who are chosen, because when you put up Rickets versus Boehly, it's quite a simple equation. They've both got money. That cancels out. They're both American owners. That cancels out. Then you're only eventually, when you boil everything down, it would have been left to, okay, so how do they run their sporting institutions? Look at the Dodgers, look at the Cubs, and it's no contest, right? The Dodgers are an elite winning machine. They like you say, they always reinvest back into what they've got. They're well run and they're efficiently run, and that's really important, especially now for a football club. We're not going to get someone like Roman again, who's going to just pump money into the club and until he's blue in the face, and like we'd all love that, I'm sure, but we can't have that because people aren't. It's just not the sort of investment people are willing to make anymore, especially in a club at the size of Chelsea. If you're putting over £3 billion into something, you want to at least see it make a bit of money. And so you're not going to see someone just put money in until they're blue in the face. So that's why the Dodgers are a clear indicator over the Cubs in that way of Boehly versus Rickets, because they're much better run and much more efficiently run. That ultimately brings me down on Boehly's side for me. It's clear that if you actually had to line them up together, and if you were picking one or the other in terms of Boehly and Rickets, which seem like, apparently from what I've learned, the two front runners, Boehly is a clear favourite.
Yeah, I mean, he wins out really in every aspect, as you just reeled off there. I mean, it almost is it's not a no. Well, yeah, I think it pretty much is a no-brainer from the choices we've got left. He's the only obvious choice. I mean, I just wanted to come on to a point about one big point about the bidding process is the redevelopment of the stadium. You touched on it briefly then. Everyone loves Stamford Bridge. It's steeped in history. It's a great place to go. Real nice stadium. But the fact of the matter is, football's evolving. Chelsea are a massive football club. The stadium doesn't reflect that. When you look at us compared to, dare I say it, Tottenham, probably one of the best stadiums in the world. Arsenal with the Emirates, City with the Etihad, Old Trafford, Anfield, etc. We're a big club, but our stadium doesn't reflect that. And now, obviously, we can't move. It's virtually impossible to relocate due to the Chelsea pitch owners. But there very much is, room to redevelop and increase the capacity. In the brochure that actually went out, I think this was a few weeks ago, but if you went from 40-odd thousand to about 60,000, revenue would go from 70 mil to 200 million. Obviously, I know the stadium's going to be a vast expense. Oli, where do you stand on Stamford Bridge? As much as we, I suppose, traditionalists and like history, etc., we don't like to see things change, but is the reality ultimately that to evolve with the times and evolve with football, we've got to upgrade the stadium?
It's an emotional thing, isn't it? Because you've got people who go to the bridge ever since like sort of our age or so, who've been to the bridge since they were little kids, and it's what they know, and it's difficult because Chelsea, as much as people like to sort of have a joke and a dig at Chelsea, the atmosphere at Stamford Bridge is very good. The food is okay. I think we all know that. A bit expensive maybe, but there's a lot of things going for Stamford Bridge at the moment, and it's got a lot of character. So it's quite an emotional thing, especially when people have such an attachment to their club. And I think people aren't necessarily against redevelopment or even revamping, because Stamford Bridge has been revamped before and it will be revamped again. I think that was one thing that makes Boehly's bid look good is apparently he's not planning on completely redeveloping the stadium, but revamping it to go from say 42 to 56 rather than say 42 to 60 or 70,000, which isn't always, in my opinion, isn't always necessary because you won't sell out every game, and that can lead to problems in terms of the atmosphere at the games. But ultimately, I think it probably does need it at least a little bit. And that's when I have to put all my emotion aside for it, because as much as I love the bridge, it's a little outdated. It's a little bit old. It's a bit like like your old car. You love it, you're used to it, you like it, and all its little quirks. But an upgrade's not a bad thing, and change isn't a bad thing. It's just about making sure that if you are going to change, you get it right, and that's really, really important because nobody wants to end up in like a soulless bowl of a stadium, which people have said about, the Olympic Stadium for West Ham. Oh, no, they moved, but they didn't redevelop, they moved. But, with Tottenham's new stadium, even people call it the empty head, there's a lot of things about making sure you get that right. And that's really, really important. I would say, you've got sort of a list of things, right, in any new owner. And I think people have sort of like a tier list, in my opinion, of, what you're looking for in your head. Up at the top has got to be sort of financial backing, willing to put your hand in your pocket, pay for players, things like that, smart financial decisions, paying your way with the big boys like Chelsea do. Next, you've got things like Stamford Bridge, which is, a really, really important thing, about keeping the cultural legacy of Chelsea, which is vitally crucial because, you don't want to go from something where it feels cultural and like a loved and warm old place, like your old car, to some fancy new Mercedes that you don't even recognize and you don't know what any of the buttons do in there, right? So you've got to make it work, and you've got to find that middle ground between new and old. And hopefully when Stamford Bridge is redeveloped, because the money, according to Rain Group, needs to be put aside for redevelopment or revamping, that'll happen.
Yeah, and as Texas Blue said, as we've said, we have to do something about the stadium and capacity or get left behind in terms of revenues other clubs get from home games. Yeah, it's no denying it. We are missing out on millions and millions of pounds by having a smaller stadium compared to the likes of our rivals. So it's definitely something that needs to happen. It's going to be at the forefront of any successful bidder, and it's going to cost an absolute fortune to do it. Probably $1 billion at least to redevelop the stadium.
Roughly, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's obviously that the hassle of having to sort out where we're going to go and play whilst the stadium's being redeveloped. Do we go to Twickenham? Do we go to Wembley? Do you know what do we do? There's those situations. Obviously, we'll come to that when we get to it. But yeah, it is something that needs to happen. I mean, last question, Oli, to you before we round out. I mean, as a fan, how do you feel about the future of the club going forward as we do enter into what is essentially going to be the unknown? I mean, how do you feel about it?
Very uncertain. There's a lot of anxiety around it, and you can see it online. You can feel it. There's tension, especially in terms of Twitter and things like that. There's a lot of sort of anticipation, and I would go as far to say anxiety and tension and stuff. It's because of that unknown. We just learned today that there could be the 1% of 1% of 1% chance that Chelsea aren't going to be sold at all, and Roman will be back. But at the same time, that's unlikely, I would say. But then you've got the options that are left. When you look at it, you've got Boehly, who seems like he knows how to do things. Yeah. The Rickets, which is don't really want them. Pagliuca and Broughton are sort of unknown entities, really, in terms of how they would run the club. That sort of gives you, like if you're sort of middling out, one bad, one good, two sort of in the middle, not sure. It gives you about a 50-50 chance. And I think that's kind of how a lot of people feel. It's sort of like a 50-50 chance whether Chelsea become Tottenham or Real Madrid, if you know what I mean, in terms of legacy, in terms of size of the stadium, in terms of everything, because this is what we now expect, to kick off Chelsea into the next century even, like this is a huge, huge thing now. And that's why it's so important as well for the fans to make their voices heard, no matter who eventually becomes part of the Chelsea process. I hope they keep the fans involved. And even if they're not, We personally have to hold ourselves accountable and make a lot of noise if things aren't right. You can always do things to make sure that the Chelsea fans' voices are heard. Things like buying pitch ownership shares and things like that. If you've got the money, of course, and I understand not everybody does. Doing things like going to protests if it comes to that. All sorts of things that can really, really help and make sure Chelsea's fans are heard. Because look at the Super League.
Yeah,
that is a clear indication of Chelsea fans changing something. Not just for Chelsea, but eventually for everyone in the league and all over the world who split off and wanted to go and do the Super League. We didn't want it. We said no, and then everyone else said no. It's a real indication that the fans' voice have a real impact and an importance at Chelsea. So not just in this process coming up, but also in the rest of the process of having a new owner. We've got to hold them accountable. We've got to hold ourselves accountable, and we've got to make sure our voices are heard.
Yeah, 100%. Because as you say, spending 2.5 to 3 billion on something, that's not to move on in a couple of years' time. That's to hang around 10, 15, 20 years. So that's why this is so important. As you perfectly put, we've got to make our voices heard to ensure that we get the best possible owner that we deserve. And I'm sure Roman, the Rain Group, etc., will do that. And I think Roman still does have some say in who the final buyer will be. And I'm sure that as he's done so well during his time here, he'll do the best thing for the club and he will choose the right person. But as you say, there is always going to be that level of uncertainty. Let's be honest, we don't know anything about these guys really. Until they're actually in situ, we've got no idea really what any of them are going to do. Yes, they've got their pitch and they'll say it, but obviously you're going to big yourself up a bit to make your bid look good and get further. But once you're in, you're not actually under any obligation to do anything you said. I'm not saying that they will do that, but once you're in, you can sort of do what you want. What you said to get in the first place is almost irrelevant. So you just got to hope that these people are decent people. They keep to their word and they do what they're going to say. But ultimately, for me, as long as I don't mind, as long as it's not the Rickets, as long as it's someone that has Chelsea's best interests at heart, communicates with the fans, consults with the fans on issues, invests in the team, develops a stadium, etc., and keeps Chelsea as a winning machine, that's the most important thing at the end of the day. And
I couldn't have put it better myself. That's exactly what Chelsea fans want. Exactly.
That's it. And it's summed up in a nutshell there. I mean, obviously, there's still a number of weeks to run on this, but I mean, Oli, I'm sure you'd agree with me. It's whether it's the end of April or it might be the end of May, it is vitally important that a new owner is in place before the transfer window opens in the summer so that our summer dealings aren't disrupted. I mean, I guess that's fairly obvious to say, but it really has to be dealt with by them, because if it's not, we risk running into the start of next season massively on the back foot and potentially with no investment over the summer at all.
The smarter groups will be doing the legwork for that now.
Yeah.
We saw the thing that came out yesterday. Yesterday or today about Boehly, about how he's, obviously it's probably his PR machine, but saying about how he's a bit like Thiago Silva. He's always a few steps ahead of everyone else, and it's and it's important to remember, of all the things that someone can point out, saying winning mentality, blah blah blah, willing to spend money, blah blah blah. That's something that you point out. It's a thing that people point out when it's relevant. It's not the first thing people think about saying, and so I think that's hopefully indicative of what someone like Boehly will be. He'll get in and crack on straight away.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think Boehly's definitely our choice, and I think he's a lot of Chelsea fans' preferred choice. So hopefully we'll have to see how that rounds out, but hopefully it does end up as him. There's still a long way to go. Don't completely rule out Roman coming full circle and keeping the club. You just never know. That really
stranger things have happened,
mate. Stranger things have happened. Oli, thank you so much for your time, mate. Really appreciate it. Great to chat all things Chelsea as always. If people want to check out more of what you do and stuff, where's the best place for them to go? I've linked your socials in the description below. Anywhere else you'd like to direct them?
No, not really. As long as just go to the description. If you like what I do, I've got a lot of things that I like to say. I really like to talk, so I'm on Twitter quite a lot. And hopefully soon I'm going to be starting a podcast of my own. And so it's all big things are coming, and also subscribe to Charlie, because, he reached out to me out of the blue, and, he was really, really nice, and he runs a damn good show. So give him a like, give him a subscribe.
Oh, thank you, mate. Really appreciate that. Guys, big up yourselves in the chat. Thank you so much for getting involved. I'm seeing all your comments coming through. Really appreciate all the support. As Oli said, smash a like on this video. Please do subscribe to the channel. Help me head towards 400. Almost there now. But yeah, guys, thanks for tuning in. Catch you again in the next couple of days for a preview for Chelsea-Brentford. Up the Chelsea and no to Rickets.